Namaste and hello friends. I'm making this a second video it's a continuation of the first one that I made on the Ram Janmabhoomi Ayodhya dispute. And I'm making this one in English because I want to address an issue which I want people who are not in India to be able to comprehend and hear. And this is the question that I kind of closed my previous video with, which was in Hindi. And the question being, what's the moral and ethical argument versus the legal argument in the Ram Janmabhoomi case? So as you all know, and if you don't, I'll summarize it for you. The Supreme Court of India, after a very long, laborious legal process, ruled that a certain piece of land, a very small piece of land, 1500 square yards, belongs to the Hindus. And it's a very complex definition as to what it means that it belongs to the Hindus. But essentially, the court battle was being fought on the issue of who owns this land, or what would be called in legal parlance as a title suit. So the court was only tasked to determine as to who has a better claim for ownership. And in its wisdom, after a very long process, as I said, and a very comprehensive one, the court ruled that the Hindus have a better claim. The court in no way has implied that Lord Ram was born on that land, or the court has not implied in any way that the masjid that was standing on that land was necessarily built after demolishing a mosque. None of that is what the court has concluded. These were arguments that the court considered, but these are not decisions or statements that a court has made. However, the court said that this land should belong to the Hindus, and they have ordered for a trust to be set up to that effect, to facilitate the construction of a new temple, as well as they provided relief to the aggrieved Muslim parties, and allocated them 5 acres of land in a suitable area for building of a mosque as well. So what I want to talk about today is the moral question and the ethical question. So when I scan the media, both in the India and the West, I see such a one-sided and biased pattern in reporting in terms of, it is almost borderline that the Supreme Court of India is also a very communal institution. Now, think about this for a second. In a country that was partitioned on the basis of religion, that chose to remain secular, right? That has 950 million people of a certain faith, aka the Hindus. They choose to go to a 120-year-old legal process to ask for a temple to be built on perhaps the most sacred spot in their own country. The equivalent of this would be, I don't know, if someone goes and builds a church at Makkah, right? And let's say the Christians conquer Makkah. I mean, this actually happened in Jerusalem, so think about it maybe from that perspective. But Makkah is even more holy. So when the Christians conquered Jerusalem, or let's say they conquered Makkah for some reason, right? And let's say they demolish the Kaaba and build a church there. And even if they don't demolish, let's say they build a church next to the Kaaba in that same holy area of where the Hajj is conducted. And let's say then the Arabs come back into power and the Christians are left in a minority in that area. Now, based on any precedent anywhere in the world, whether it's Spain, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Arabia, whether it's Syria, whether it's Palestine, what would likely happen is that the minority community would be annihilated, firstly. Secondly, there would be no question around trying to go through a legal process to determine whether there should be a church there or a mosque, let's say in Makkah's case. It would probably be demolished overnight or converted. Let alone go through a litigation process and ask the court to adjudicate and give the aggrieved community the legal right to build, whatever the place of worship in their case might be. In this case, let's say a mosque, in my example. But the Hindus did. So in 1880, the first litigation was filed during the British rule in India, and the sub-magistrate of the local court back in the day actually said that it is unfortunate that a mosque has been built on a land that is held sacred by Hindus, but because it happened 350 years ago, there's very little we can do. And all we can do is order that status quo be maintained. And And when India became independent, it would have been almost a no-brainer for Hindus to, there are people who believe that around 40,000 temples in India have been destroyed by Muslim invading kings. And a lot of this is, by the way, recorded in their own histories, because they took a lot of pride in doing this. So it's not that we are saying it, it is they who are actually saying it with some amount of pride. But what I was about to say is that on the eve of the Indian independence, it would have been very easy for the Hindus to, to say that, okay, hey, we want, okay, you can live here if you want to. We're a secular country. However, these are historical wrongs. This particular temple was always there, or even if it was, even if it wasn't always there, we decide that this is what millions of people believe and agree, and therefore should be done. I don't think any Muslim would have had any objections at that stage, because they would have been literally so thankful that they are not being kicked out of the country. But instead of doing that, we didn't do that. We actually legislated in the Parliament of India that and this is a retrospective act because it was passed in much later, but the act actually says that all religious places that existed on the eve of the partition of India, when India became an independent country, will remain as they are and will not be changed or converted or destroyed. Now, they did this because the precedent all over the world, whether it was in Spain, where all the churches were first turned into mosques by the Moors and the Berbers, and then when the Christians reconquered Spain, they turned all the mosques back into churches. Or it is Hagia Sophia in Turkey, where a church was converted into a mosque, and then a secular leader Ataturk turned it into a museum, and now an Islamist has again turned it into a mosque. Or it is the I'm forgetting the name of the mosque, but the main mosque of Damascus in Syria is also actually a church. Again, it was converted. So to prevent this sort of a event from taking place, the Parliament of India said that anything that was what it was on the eve of the independence remains as it is, because otherwise this would become a big issue in India, given the number of temples that have been destroyed and or converted into places of worship for some other religion. However, the Parliament made one exception to this, and they said that this law does not apply to that one place, Babri Masjid, or the Ayodhya land, or what's called the Ram Janmabhoomi, which literally means the birthplace of Lord Ram. And it is of such significance to the Hindus and Indians in general. I mean, it's very hard to explain this, but in Thailand, the current dynasty, which has been ruling Thailand for 238 years, called the Chakri dynasty, they named their kings as Ram 1, Ram 2, Ram 3. The current one is Ram the 10th from 2016. The capital of the dynastic capital of that dynasty in Thailand is Ayodhya. It's now called Ayutthaya, as they pronounce it, but it's basically because they viewed their kings as an incarnation of Lord Ram, they actually named their own capital as Ayodhya. That is how intrinsically tied Lord Ram is to the city of Ayodhya, and how sacred it is to the people who follow that faith, or at least have some sort of an interest in it. So the question really for me was that I don't think there is any precedent anywhere on earth where a community with such a major majority and a claim of historical injustice goes through such a patient and laborious process, legal process, to claim the right of a small area in one small derelict part of northern India, aka the Babri Masjid area. It's only 1,500 square meters, like I said. And even after that, after 120 years of litigation, now that the Supreme Court has ruled in their favor and allowed for the construction, even then there are parties on the other side who are aggrieved and don't just welcome it and say, okay, once and for all, this has been settled. We are happy that the Supreme Court has, let's say, said, okay, you can have a temple there. The Supreme Court has already said that we'll give you another plot of land for a big mosque in a grant. But even now, it somehow becomes that the Hindus are communal, and that the Hindus are, reclaiming or marginalizing the Muslims or the minorities in general. And I find that to be a fairly preposterous argument, because, like I said, I don't think there's an example of such patience and such respect for the other community as has been demonstrated in the case of the Babri Masjid Ayodhya dispute. The question as a rationalist, as an atheist, I'm often faced with is that what would be my view? Now, my view on that issue would be that to rule and to govern a country of the size and the diversity of India, you have to take into account action that satisfies the largest number of people, right? So teleological argument, because that is essentially what is democracy, right? It is immaterial whether Lord Ram was actually born there or not. It is immaterial whether he even existed there. It is immaterial whether the actual mosque was built on demolished land or not, although that's very highly probable. That is a different discussion. If a large chunk of people, and I'm talking in hundreds of millions, associate very sincerely with that piece of land as well as the sacredness attached to it, then it becomes sacred. It does not matter what I think. So I'm all for building a temple there in a peaceful manner while taking care of the grievances of the other community. I am also for the other community actually showing a little bit of a large heart and saying that that's fine. It's one mosque. There are 27 mosques in that town alone, by the way, right? It's that one mosque. Clearly, it's very important to you all, that particular piece of land. The government of India, through parliamentary act, through an act of the parliament, has already said that nothing else will ever change. So yes, let's live together happily. And you can have that land. We'll make another mosque somewhere else. You give us a piece of land, and you can make a temple over there. It was an opportunity for the Muslims to actually show that they practice what they preach, because on every opportunity they talk about how they're proud Indians, how they're part of the culture, how they're believe in the Indian values and constitution, etc. And they have to keep saying this because their brethren created Pakistan and partitioned India, which killed 10 million people. So they have to keep playing this story that hey, we are not them, we are different kind of people, although arguably they're the same people. But even that one opportunity, I think, which kind of presented itself for the Indian Muslims, and remember that's 200 million people, I think was totally hijacked by the interests of their leadership, which is unbelievably vacuous and devoid of any sort of intelligence or sincerity in their representation of the Indian Muslims. And they kept making it an issue, even though the ordinary Muslim didn't really care about it. And interestingly, a mosque, as a matter of principle in Islam, is not as some sort of an essential place that has got some sort of a sacred nature, or it's not hallowed in any way. Mosques are routinely demolished in all major Islamic countries, and they can be even demolished to build public convenience, utilities, roads, toilets, etc. Because a mosque is by in itself a congregation hall. It does not have any. Your ability to pray as a Muslim has nothing to do with whether you go to this mosque or that mosque. You can pray on the street as they do, in an aircraft, in your home, in your living room, anywhere, in your office. A mosque is a place of convenience because, okay, on a certain day, a large number of people wish to come together and pray. Okay, so let's build a hall here. And then, of course, with time, they started decorating those halls, and there's ornate, pieces of artistry that became a part of the mosque. But that was just because, there's a representation of a culture. It had nothing to do with the actual religious importance of a mosque. So I thought that the Muslims actually had an opportunity there, especially because their religion permits it, to say that, hey, you know what, that's fine, we don't really care. I mean, we would have ideally liked this to be a very peaceful dispute, but if you care so much about that piece of land, have it, build us another mosque, we can pray anywhere else, because our belief in our Supreme is not based on that piece of land. The Hindu belief in their Supreme is very much based on the piece of land. So in some ways, it's an asymmetrical dialogue. We are talking about two different things. The Hindus sincerely believe that deity, that land is sacred. And the Muslims don't believe that any deity or any land is sacred, right? They have a direct communication with their Supreme, which I think is I think they could have used that to their advantage. But again, like I said, they got trapped in the leadership, and perhaps what were the personal interests of some of the leaders to keep the matter simmering, and created a division which has just cause more grief than any sort of solution, even though the Supreme Court has now finally ruled in one party's favor, in this case being the Hindus. So, like I said, I wanted to touch briefly on the moral argument, and just to summarize, I think that it was, especially because of the act of the parliament that I mentioned, it is very well within the rights of the Hindus to expect that a temple is built here, like I said, in a peaceful manner. My expectation would be that not just would the Muslim community support that, but there is no shame in a secular government supporting that as well, so far as the right principles and the law is followed, and so far as the government is not spending money on it. Right? People conflate secularism with lack of religion. Secularism is only neutrality of religion. So the government is not going to pay for that land or pay for the actual temple or a mosque, but that does not mean that the government should not have a view on who should actually be building a temple here or a mosque, if that might be the case. And just to clarify, the government has not done that. This judgment has the government was not a party to this dispute. So the government clearly said that we are not interested in what the Supreme Court says. You decide who gets this piece of land. Like I said, it became a title dispute. Which is, I don't think that's actually a very good view to have. The government should have had a little bit of a view based on the history, based on the sentiments of the people, as well as based on based on the possibility of some sort of reconciliation between these two communities, which have been at the opposite ends of a table for a very long time, especially since the partition of India. And I think that opportunity was lost. So even though the temple will now be created and the foundation stone has been laid by the Prime Minister, I think the opportunity to reconcile genuinely has been lost. And I would place that certainly, the onus of that certainly more on the Muslim leadership, because like I said, it was an opportunity for them to show a little bit of a large heart and do something which would have maybe won the hearts and the minds of the people who are distrustful of them in general, and not for reasons that are entirely untrue in any way. So yeah, just wanted to summarize the Ayodhya Babri Masjid dispute for you all. Like I said, a very long legal process. I think the decision is incidentally one that is good for the nation, but I worried because the decision could have gone the other way, and I don't think that would have actually solved anything. It would have just kept the conflict alive and perhaps made it worse. But thankfully, the decision went in a way that I think allows for the greatest good to occur for the greatest number of people. So the utilitarian argument is what I'm employing here. And I think that works reasonably well in the current setup. And my suggestion both to anyone who's outside the country or is not familiar with India is to not read too much into what you might be seeing in the Western media as a portrayal of, Hindu extremism rising or anything like that. I think it is just another testament to the patience and to the inherent non-violent mindset of the Hindu people as well as the Hindu nation in terms of India in general, that they've gone through such a long process to assert, which is historically, morally, and now legally proved to be a very legitimate claim. I hope you did enjoy hearing this, and if you have any questions or feedback for me, I'd love to hear from you. But otherwise, I do thank you for your time.